Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell and welcome to the last video for Unit 4 Area of Study 1. For the final dot point in this area of study, we're going to look at Porter's generic strategies theory. So this theory can be quite complex, but what we need to do is just know the basics, and that's what we're going to go through today. So Porter's theory outlines how businesses can gain a sustainable competitive advantage. He outlines that there are two main ways that they can gain this competitive advantage, and he calls them generic strategies. He actually outlines three generic strategies, but our study design only states that we need to know two, and so we're just going to learn those two. The two generic strategies are the lower cost strategy, which you may also see this strategy called cost advantage or cost leadership strategies, because that's the language that Porter used in his theory. However, throughout this video, I'm going to call that strategy the lower cost strategy because that's the language that our study design uses. The other generic strategy is called the differentiation strategy. So we're going to go through each one of those individually. Now, the lower cost strategy is where a business is able to gain a competitive advantage by becoming the low cost producer in its industry. It's not just about lowering costs, it's about becoming the low cost producer in its industry. So now businesses can achieve this in a number of ways, and I've just got some examples here. One is that including by operating on a large scale, so therefore achieving economies of scale. They could implement technology into the business that will improve efficiency, or even Porter talks about them having preferential access to materials that other businesses don't have access to. Now, there are clearly many other different ways that businesses can reduce their costs, and it doesn't only have to be reducing costs in the operations area, all these three that we've gone through today. These are just examples. There's many other different ways that a business can reduce their costs, and in reducing their costs, it doesn't just have to be in operations, it can be in all areas of the business. Now, once a business has been able to gain a cost advantage by being a cost leader and having lower costs than other businesses within their industry, they are able to gain a competitive advantage in two main ways. Firstly, if the business can reduce their costs yet sell their good or service at a price that is at or near the industry average, then they are able to gain a competitive advantage because they've increased their profit margins significantly, and therefore they don't need to sell as many goods or services as their competitors. Or on the other hand, another way to do it is that the business can pass on the cost savings to the consumer by lowering their price and being more attractive to the price sensitive consumer, therefore opening up the market to a larger group of people that they can sell to as more people are attracted to the lower price. Now, it's important any cost reduction measures that take place within the business that they don't have a negative effect on or impact on the value to the customer. If this does happen and there is a negative effect on the product, then sales are likely to decrease, which will offset any reduction in costs, and the business is likely to lose its competitive advantage anyway. Now, Porter states that in order to reduce costs, businesses should look at all activities along the value chain. Now, the value chain is simply where the business looks at each part of the business that adds value to the good or service and looks for cost reduction opportunities, so where they can reduce costs in those particular activities. And that could be in areas such as operations, logistics, training, or even marketing, or any other area of the business. Now, before we move on to the differentiation strategy, it's important that we look at some possible drawbacks of a business actually implementing the lower cost strategy, just in case you need to ever evaluate or discuss these strategies. So one drawback of the lower cost strategy is that if the business continues to look at reducing costs, especially in the operations area, there is a chance that it could reduce the quality of the product, resulting in a loss of value for customers. Another drawback is that by lowering the price, or if the business decides to lower the price, the business will likely need to sell more goods or services to make a substantial profit. And finally, again, if the business decides to lower their price, there is a chance that some consumers will perceive the lowered price as lower quality and therefore select another brand to purchase from. Now, moving on to the differentiation strategy, which is where the business looks to be unique in some way that's valued by consumers. This allows the business to stand out from their competitors and will attract customers because of the unique offering. Now, by differentiating themselves from their competitors and offering something unique to the consumer, the business is rewarded by being able to charge a premium price for their good or service. The ways in which a business can actually differentiate themselves can vary, and there are a number of ways that they can do that, but I'm just going to go through a few different ways that Porter mentions in his theory. So the first one is that a business can offer unique features such as having high quality materials that no other business has, having patents that will protect any innovations and prevent other businesses implementing these unique features, and therefore the customer can only get the unique features from one business, and therefore it attracts those particular customers. It could be unique marketing. I've got the example there of Red Bull, who have amazing marketing techniques. Any business that will spend the money to have a man jump from so-called space is incredibly unique marketing, which can attract customers and differentiate themselves from their competitors. It could be that the business has unique relationships like the one with Nike and Kevin Durant, and also all their other athletes that Nike has as sponsors. Also, any innovations, that's another way that a business can differentiate themselves from competitors. Even having unique or high quality training resulting in high quality employees that can obviously do the job better, whether that be deliver a high level of customer service. And even distribution can differentiate a business. For example, Amazon Prime in some areas in the United States that offer 1 hour delivery. So these are just some examples of how businesses can differentiate themselves in order to gain a competitive advantage. Now, like before, we'll just go through some possible drawbacks of implementing the differentiation strategy. Firstly, one issue that can arise with being unique is that it often costs more, and so the costs will rise significantly. Now, if costs actually rise out of control to achieve the differentiation or the uniqueness, it will negate any benefits received through the premium price, and therefore the business will no longer have a competitive advantage. By charging a premium price, the business will exclude a portion of the market that are unable to, afford the higher price point. That can be a real drawback. And finally, if the unique features or the areas of differentiation are not well protected, it could be easy for competitors to simply copy the differentiation or the unique features, which will render any advantage useless. Now, Porter states that a business should only look to implement one of the generic strategies and not implement both. He says that businesses that look to implement both of the strategies risk being mediocre at both, and he calls that being stuck in the middle. He advises that businesses should really focus on one particular strategy and be very good at that particular strategy. However, as we've mentioned throughout this video, whatever strategy is being implemented, the other strategy cannot be totally ignored. So businesses can't reduce costs without considering the value to the customer, and businesses that implement differentiation can't completely ignore costs. Now, before we finish, we need to remember that this theory is in the area of study where we look at where a business is reviewing their performance. It's therefore important for us to look at how a business can review themselves in order to decide which generic strategy they should implement. So in order to decide on which generic strategy a business should implement, Porter states that the business should really firstly look at the industry they are in and analyze what he calls the 5 competitive forces within the industry. So here are the 5 competitive forces that he goes through, which are essentially just assessing the type of industry that a business is competing in so that they know where they're going to fit in with that particular industry. So the first is supplier power, which looks at how many suppliers are in the market and how powerful they are, and the ability for them to drive up costs. So for example, if there's only 1 or 2 powerful suppliers, then they have the ability to drive costs up, which may make it difficult to implement the lower cost strategy. And buyer power, it looks at customers and how powerful they are at driving prices down. Competitive rivalry looks at the number of competitors and again the power of those competitors. For example, a particular industry may have 2 large competitors that already compete on price, or some competitors or some industries may have a competitor like Apple that is already highly differentiated. Now, the threat of substitution looks at how easy it is for consumers to find a substitution for the business's good or service elsewhere. And finally, the threat of new entry looks at how easy it is for other businesses to enter the market. Some industries, for example, may have very few barriers, while others may have lots of barriers, such as incredibly high costs of entering the market or need approval from governments and those types of things. So a basic process that a business should go through to decide on which generic strategy they should implement is firstly to analyze those competitive forces to really see where the industry sits currently. They should then look at their own strengths to see what they are good at and compare those strengths with the competitive forces to see probably where they're best placed to take advantage of within that particular industry, and then finally make a decision about the generic strategy that's best for them. So just to recap, Porter's theory is based on generic strategies that will enable a business to gain a competitive advantage. There's two generic strategies that are listed in our study design: the lower cost strategy, where a business looks to be the low cost producer in the industry, and the differentiation strategy, which is where a business looks to offer something unique that's valued by customers. Now, in order to decide on the business strategy to implement or the generic strategy to implement, a business should look at the competitive forces within the industry to see where the industry sits, look at their own strengths and see where they fit in with the current state of the industry, and make a decision about which strategy to implement. Now, apologies that this video was longer than normal. However, there was quite a bit that we needed to cover in this theory. So we've just gone through the basics, and hopefully this video really helped you understand the basics of Porter's generic strategies. So for questions, activities, and more, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.